Yu's Hitong's soul was stuck in the corner of the room, and just like a fly trapped in a sealed house, it could only randomly smash against the walls. Every time it thought it could escape, the dark liquid would force it back to its corner, causing it to be constantly weakened. Even though his soul grew weaker because of Han Li's repeated attempts at trying to cut him with his dagger, what really made him despair was the mysterious black liquid that was corroding his soul. Since the moment the black liquid touched his soul, Yu's Hitong had felt his life essence trickle away, feeble and powerless. It also tore away at the little magic power he had left, which was even deadlier. This prevented Yu's Hitong from performing magic, causing his cast magic techniques to fail repeatedly. It was as if he were completely restricted. "Why are you trying to kill me? Why?" Faced with Han Li's ruthless attacks, the ball of light that was Yu's Hitong released a howl filled with anguish, but Han Li did not care about Yu's Hitong's unwillingness to die. Not long after, Yu's Hitong became quieter as he gradually weakened until he was finally unable to emit a sound or show a hint of movement. Seeing Yu's Hitong's stillness, Han Li did not immediately stop his attack. Instead, he continued to observe the ball of light, which had dimmed until it resembled the weak flame of a candle. After a while, Han Li gave a cold answer. "I would never believe you, a person so despicable that you would easily and willingly swear a poisonous oath that condemned your family and ancestors to a gruesome death under heaven's wrath. If I did work with you, then I would following Dr. Mo to his death." With a chilling glare, he gave Yu's Hitong's flickering soul one last glance before turning around, and without hesitation, he swiftly pushed open the heavy door. With the door thrown open, a few sharp rays of sunlight shot inside and landed on the globe of light. Upon contact with the dying soul, the sunlight burned Yu's Hitong's last remaining soul force, causing it to turn into a curl of smoke that promptly disappeared into the air with a pu. With this, the last of trace of Yu's Hitong was cleanly wiped away from this world by Han Li. To say that Han Li knew that Yu's Hitong feared the light was not exactly true. He first thought of this idea when he recalled how Mo Juren, upon entering the room, quickly blew out several candles. If he did not remember this event, then he would still be hacking at the globe of light to no avail, causing an immeasurable worry to arise in his heart. Although Han Li had eliminated Yu's Hitong's life essence with ease, he had prepared an extra tube of 7 poison water in advance in case his plan didn't work. Compared to the 5 poison water, which Mo Juren took away from him, this second tube contained extra ingredients that greatly increased its potency. One of the added materials was the flowered mushroom, which was extremely deadly to normal mortals and even more effective against immortal cultivators. The effect of its potency could be seen in how Yu's Hitong was unable to use magic, allowing his soul to be easily destroyed. This was the reason why Han Li splashed some 7 poison water on Yu's Hitong's soul. From his research of a variety of legends, there was a visible trend that ghosts, monsters, demons, and the like are afraid of chicken blood, black dog blood, and other similar bodily fluids, so in this case, Han Li treated Yu's Hitong as a ghost. By guessing randomly and through pure coincidence did Han Li manage to kill Yu's Hitong. If Yu's Hitong knew that his death was based on speculation, he would have died again from vomiting. Han Li was not clear about all the effects of his 7 water poison, but he was certain that when he opened the door, Yu's Hitong would die without fail, and it was only with this fact reassuring him that he acted so mercilessly and ruthlessly. Now he was finally free and did not have to live a life of constant worry about a knife placed at his throat, nor did he have to be ready to flee at a moment's notice. Han Li calmly strode back to the center of the stone room, where he stayed for a moment before he suddenly jumped up a good 3 meters and opened his mouth to shout out his heart's joys. After he finished releasing his pent-up emotions, he finally returned back to the childish nature of a 16-year-old. "I'm finally free. I'm finally free. Han Li's voice was suddenly cut short, almost as if a knife had swiftly descended on him when he saw the giant man standing in the doorway to the stone room. It was the giant man who Mo Juren referred to as Iron Slave. Han Li's face immediately became ugly and unsightly as he stared at the giant figure in front of him. He suddenly felt his shoulders ache as he realized that he had committed a huge mistake. He had forgotten about the giant man's existence, and therefore forgot to ask Yu's Hitong about the Emojurans and the giant man's relationship along with his weakness. The only consolation Hanli had was the fact that the giant man did not show any interest in the stone room and continued to wander around the premise of the door, still following Emojuran's final command without throwing a single glance into the open room. Hanli couldn't help but furrow his eyebrow as he thought that the Iron Slave was the hardest type of person to deal with, since it did not listen to reason or persuasion and would only follow orders given by its master. The other problem was that if Hanli couldn't defeat him in battle, and the only thing that stood a chance of winning was the poison he concocted. However, the cylinder that once held the poison now lay empty on the floor. This thought caused Hanli to pace back and forth in the stone room, scrambling to think of a plan to deal with the Iron Slave, but after a lot of thinking, his mind was in a mess and he still did not have a plan. Inadvertently, Hanli's gaze fell upon Emojuran's dead body. Suddenly, he had an idea. Maybe I can find something on his body that can be used to restrain the Iron Slave, Hanli immediately thought. He quickly glanced outside and saw that the Iron Slave was still pacing back and forth with no signs of tiredness or an intent to go near the stone room. Seeing this, Hanli calmed down a bit as he quickly walked up to Emojuran's body and shamelessly stretched out both of Dr. Mo's arms to begin carefully examining every inch of his dead corpse. Hanli removed all kinds of weird oddities one by one from Emojuran's body. Some were items that he recognized while others were foreign to him. He sorted these objects in two piles that he placed next to him. While sorting out all the objects, Hanli had a fair share of surprises, causing him to exclaim a few times. The amount of objects Emojuran carried on himself was not small, and some were even dangerous and life-threatening objects. A tube of some mysterious poison. A bag of sand dipped in lethal snake venom. 10 or so incredibly sharp boomerangs. As the number of items on the floor increased, the more panicked and unsettled Hanli became. He realized how lucky he had been when battling against Emojuran. If the other had not wanted to capture him alive, Hanli would have most likely died. After wiping away the cold sweat from his face, Hanli laughed mockingly to himself. Me, a living man, is afraid of a dead man's possessions. After removing all the items from Emojuran's body, he started to carefully sift through all the suspicious-looking items. This small bottle is so foul-smelling, but it must be some kind of antidote, so it should be okay. This weird-looking weapon looks oddly similar to a wheel, and even though I don't know what it's used for, it shouldn't be related to the Iron Slave, so I'll first put it to the side. As for this spice bag, Hanli continued to fiddle and inspect each item while talking aloud to himself, making it seem as if he was in high spirits when suddenly he found himself holding a small bag. Within his hands was a normal-looking spice bag that, under normal circumstances, would not catch the eyes of others. However, Hanli knew that since it was on Emojuran's body, it would not be anything but simple. Hanli weighed the small spice bag in his hands in hopes of gaining insight on its contents, but he only noticed that the bag was exceedingly light and could not possibly contain anything heavy. After weighing it for a second time, he felt that there might be a paper-like object, or something similar, hidden within the small bag. Hanli prepared himself mentally before opening the bag, and just as he expected, he saw several sheets of paper tucked inside. He glanced at the paper and noticed that it was written in Emojuran's handwriting, which caused a heavy feeling to weigh down his heart. After briefly skimming the paper, he did a double take as he reread the note and realized that it was Emojuran's personal will. Hanli felt bewildered, and due to his curiosity, he carefully read the contents on the few pieces of paper. After he finished reading, Hanli lifted his head upward and stared for a long time before releasing a heavy sigh. Furrowing his brows, he felt an extremely heavy weight descend over his heart. With his hands clasped together on the back of his head, he looked like an old man as he paced aimlessly. He would first walk 2 steps, then stop and ponder upon something. After realizing he couldn't fully grasp his thought, he would continue to pace a few steps before stopping once again to think. Just like this, Han Li continued to pace around, mimicking a donkey circling around Mo Juren's body. His face became unsettled, one moment it was bright red, and the next it would turn white, showing the raging emotions he felt within himself, unable to be pacified. If Li Feiyu saw Han Li's unstable mindset, he would probably mock him with loud ridicule. The reason for Han Li's change was Mo Juren's will, which left behind some extremely terrible news that left him with one of two difficult choices. Within the antidote for insect corpse pill that Mo Juren had previously given him was a rare type of poison that could only be removed by his family's precious warm yang jade. Apart from this treasure, even legendary antidotes could not save him. Written on the few sheets of paper, Mo Juren's will clearly stated that the poison he used on Han Li was for the worst case scenario that Mo Juren would die from failing to possess Han Li. So, in preparation of any unsettled business he might have after his death, he decided to include one final, simple exchange with Han Li in his will, allowing Han Li and the deceased doctor to benefit greatly. Mo Juren would be able to take care of any unsettled business while Han Li would be able to gain a large amount of wealth and an indescribable amount of benefits. As for whether Yu Zhitong would be the last one alive, Mo Juren did not give it a second thought. He only briefly mentioned him in his will, saying that Yu Zhitong was weak by nature and afraid of death, and although he was a bit smart, that was the extent of his current capabilities. Mo Juren also mentioned that even though Yu Zhitong was an immortal cultivator, he would never become anything great, and for this reason he was quickly disregarded as being the last person alive. Once Han Li saw this, he laughed bitterly in his heart at how Mo Juren did not predict that in the end, he would fall into the trap of the innocent-looking Yu Zhitong. If Han Li had not hit his real eternal spring arts cultivation level, he would most likely have ended up like Mo Juren, allowing Yu Zhitong to receive all the benefits. Of course, Mo Juren had also planned to achieve his fantasies of becoming an immortal cultivator by taking over Han Li's body. It seemed like no matter what kind of cultivator one became, one must not underestimate others. In his will, the trade Mo Juren proposed was very simple. He wrote that in a year or two, the poison would become effective. To remove this poison, Han Li must make a trip to Mo Juren's home. Mo Juren had wives and daughters, along with a decently sized business. He had made arrangements for them before he left, but he feared that if he were absent for an extended period of time, his enemies would have evil intent against his family. For this reason, Han Li must rush to protect his wives and family members before the situation escalated and preferably help them escape from the bloody world that is Jiang Hu so that they can live a normal life without want. As a way of compensating and removing any of Han Li's suspicions, Mo Juren's will betrothed one of his daughters to him and gave him a dowry of 1/2 of all his assets along with the Yang jaded treasure. Before Mo Juren left, he had given the precious jade to his wives for safekeeping and also explicitly told them that it was to be used as part of their daughter's dowry, so even if Han Li did not want to wed his daughter, he would be forced to. Of course, Mo Juren clearly pointed out that his enemies' clans were very large and influential. They also contained many cultivators. The sheer number of members made it hard for the clans to supervise and control all of their members, and with Han Li's current abilities, he wouldn't be capable of dealing with them head-on. For this reason, he specifically prepared 2 false identities for Han Li and carefully hid them in a secret location unknown to anyone besides Mo Juren. Furthermore, he even left behind a token belonging to Mo Juren and a handwritten letter. At the same time, he also left a list of names that clearly stated his trusted aides, those he suspected of plotting against him, and the names of his enemy clans within his letter. He also wrote out several things Han Li must take note of. Finally, to express the sincerity of his will, he even left behind how to control and summon the Iron Slave and the Cloud-Winged Bird. What caught Han Li's attention was how Mo Juren vaguely pointed out the fact that the Iron Slave was actually a soulless corpse whose soul has already left this world plane. After reading this, Han didn't know how he should feel about Imojuran treating him well and so that Han wouldn't feel bad about being used. Even so, ignore the poison within his body, saying the Han heart was not moved when facing such a large sum of money would be an outright lie. Han had always been sensitive to money and was therefore very interested in Imojuran's proposal. As for the betrothal to Imojuran's daughter, Han felt an odd feeling well up within himself. He was around the age when he would experience his first set of romantic thoughts. Furthermore, he knew from Imojuran's original appearance that his daughter could not be anything but beautiful. But the risk he faced was no small matter. If he was not careful, he might end up having to pay with his life. Imojuran's enemies are not simple characters. Imojuran had carefully constructed a watertight plan to take care of any unsettled business, using the chance to start a new life filled with beautiful women and immense wealth as a collective incentive in order to tie Han to Imojuran's family, effectively mixing safety and danger together by forcing Han to swallow this honey-wrapped poison pill. Han paced around the room several times before stopping. Should I accept Dr. Mo's deal right now, or should I wait? I'm absolutely sure there is no cure before making my decision. Han was helpless, unable to come to a conclusion. Then, he looked outside at the iron slave and thought back at the unintelligible chant left behind at the end of Imojuran's will. A sense of curiosity rose within his heart as he prepared the steps to control the iron slave. Han bent down and retrieved from within the pile of items a brass watch small enough to fit in the palm of his hand. The brass watch was delicately crafted with harmonious proportions that made it look pleasing to the eyes. With one glance, he could tell that it was the work of a skilled artisan. The only difference this watch had from an ordinary one was the watch frame, which had faint traces of blood stains, making it particularly eye-catching. Han carefully inspected all the features of this so-called soul-luring watch. From its surface, he was unable to see what was so special about it, but by following Imojuran's instructions, he could control the frightening iron slave. Such an object was inconceivable. Han held onto the small watch with his left hand and a dagger with his right hand. Slowly and cautiously, he walked out past the stone door and approached the iron slave. When he was 20 feet away from the large man, he stopped walking, unwilling to move any further. If he moved even 1 foot closer, he might not be able to protect himself from any accidents. At this moment, the iron slave was standing straight with his back faced towards Han. Dang! A crisp and clear sound rang out from the watch after Han used his dagger to softly hit the copper watch. Han briefly wrinkled his eyebrows. The sound was the same as that of a normal clock, so how could it possibly control the iron slave? His heart wavered slightly. His body shrank down a little as he prepared himself to run back to the stone room at the first signs of failure. Hearing the ringing from the watch, the iron slave's shoulder shook almost imperceptibly. Seeing this reaction, Han felt delighted, and he quickly continued to strike the watch. Dang! Dang! The watch sounded out in quick succession and the iron slave's body shuddered accordingly until even his walking became staggered, unable to stand firmly, causing him to finally fall face down on the ground, unconscious. The iron slave's immense body, upon impact with the ground, unsettled a large amount of dust that caused the unprepared Han to sneeze consecutively, making him look battered and dirted. But at this time, Han could care less about his appearance. He quickly pounced on the iron slave and reached his hands out to tear away his cloak, revealing a bloated face that shocked and absolutely horrified Han. Han forcefully endured the uncomfortable feeling within his heart, unwilling to continue to inspect the iron slave anymore. Using his dagger to lightly cut open his own wrist, Han allowed some of his blood to flow out unobstructed, dripping onto the iron slave's face until his face was completely smeared with blood before Han found a clean strip of clothing to tie around his wrist in order to prevent further bleeding. Then he calmly stood to the side to watch the iron slave's reaction. Then, strangely enough, all the blood on the iron slave's face slowly sank into his skin without a single drop left behind, causing Han, who was watching off to the side, to be dumbstruck to the point where he was oblivious to the fact that he exerted too much pressure on the wound, causing fresh blood to seep out of underneath the cloth. Once the blood was completely absorbed, the iron slave opened both eyes and slowly got up. He looked incapable of speech, both his eyes seemed lifeless, without a trace of emotion. But when the iron slave turned his head to look at Hanli and their eyes made contact, Hanli heard a Wang sound within his mind. A strangely foreign yet familiar feeling arose within Hanli's heart, almost as if something foreign suddenly appeared within his heart. This feeling was like a pet he personally raised, constantly revolving around Hanli, longing for its name to be called out. Hanli was surprised but immediately calmed down because he saw that the iron slave's once rigid and deadpan face was now filled with complete obedience. Seeing this gave Hanli the feeling that he was able to control the iron slave's fate. It was a fascinating and novel feeling. Hanli suppressed his pleasant surprise and calmly gave the large man a command to test his limits. "Go and tear that stone wall for me." Without saying a single word, the iron slave walked over to the stone door with a few large strides, raised his two fists together above his head like a large hammer, and with 3 to 5 strokes smashed apart the door. As swift as a wind, he returned to Hanli's side, awaiting his next command. Hanli, who had been downcast from reading Mo Wool, could not resist any more and grinned widely from ear to ear. With this strong helper always waiting for orders, would there be any normal dangers in the future capable of harming him? Hanli was thinking about his wonderful future while he fervently sized the giant man from head to toe. The more he looked at the giant man, the happier he felt. His originally ugly view of the man now seemed more pleasing to the eye, even going as resembling a familiar face to Hanli. A familiar face. Hanli was both frightened and shocked by his own realization. How could he think that this ugly face looked familiar when it was his first time seeing it? Faced with these questions, Hanli started to closely investigate the giant man's nose and eyes in an attempt to find the answer. Gradually, he discovered that if he were to take the giant man's bloated face and shrink it to its original size, this face would not be considered ugly to look at. In fact, the iron slave's face would even look honest and straightforward, giving Hanli a sight he found both familiar and horrifying. Hanli's face turned pale. After half a day of silence, he reached out both hands to gently touch the giant man's face. "Brother Jiang, is that really you?" His words sounded downcast, making him appear to be tranquil. The face he had pieced together was remarkably similar to that of his good friend, Jiang Tai. Thinking back to Dr. Mo's last few ineffable words, Hanli was completely sure that the giant man and Jiang Tai were somehow closely related. Was it really as it was described in the letter? If the giant man was made from Jiang Tai's empty body, then his soul was already long gone. But how did his body become so huge and frightening? Hanli used his hand to feel the giant man's body temperature while staring into his lifeless and inarticulate pair of eyes. Within his heart, he was trying to guess all the bitter experiences Jiang Tai had experienced. Dr. Mo had most likely colluded with Yu's Hitong to kidnap Jiang Tai, a way of the armored elephant practitioner, giving the false pretense that he left and tricking the numerous eyes and ears within the Seven Mysteries sect. Then, they secretly used some kind of magic technique to remove Jiang Tai's soul, causing his body to become as grotesque as it was now. The effects of their technique were similar to that of the backlash from cultivating the way of the armored elephant. Hanli's guess was not very different from what had actually transpired. After administering his test, Dr. Mo suddenly had the idea of combining the way of the armored elephant with Yu's Hitong's corpse refining technique to create a group of subservient and powerful puppets that could sweep across Jiang Hu. However, he was only able to create this one soldier who Dr. Mo treated as his treasure. He usually kept the iron giant hidden somewhere at the bottom of the mountains, and the only time Dr. Mo took the iron giant out of hiding was when he returned to the mountain. But Yu's Hitong was not the least bit interested in this dubious reanimated corpse. In fact, he even snorted disdainfully because when he still had his body, he had been capable of using qi to deal with these kinds of reanimated corpses without much difficulty. In addition, this animated corpse was incomparable to the high-ranked reanimated corpses of cultivators. As a result, it was only useful in the mortal world. The only positive side was that the materials were easier to gather, the process of refining was simpler, and anyone with a little bit of internal chi could use this technique. After a while, Hanli removed his hand from the giant man's face and turned his unsettled eyes away from his body. His gaze landed upon the destroyed stone door, his mind still in a daze. In that moment, he felt his heart grow cold, not because of Jiang Tai's situation but rather because of his own cold and detached attitude. He originally thought that when he found out about his friend's miserable downfall, he would furiously lift his head up and shout out, "Mo Juran!" Use Hitong with intense hatred. But in actuality, aside from some sadness, his discovery did not stir up any fury, almost as if the one who fell under these circumstances was not his good friend Jiang Tai but rather a stranger who was not related to him in any way. Was it because he knew that the Jiang Tai in front of him was only an empty shell and not the Jiang Tai he once knew? Or was it because his heart had become too cold? Han Li's cold and detached behavior caused fear to manifest in his heart. He realized right then that he had changed too much to the point where he was foreign to himself. Han Li finally awoke from his stupor and looked at the giant man with eyes filled with turmoil, unsure of how to address him. Thinking of what Dr. Mo said about a lost soul and a walking corpse, Han Li gazed through forlorn eyes and softly said, "Brother Jiang, I imagine you have moved on to the next life, so you have no need for your body. Please allow your little brother to use it. I will definitely be careful, and I hope that you will not blame me for my actions." After saying a few words and finding peace, Han Li faced the giant man and said, "Since you are the body brother Jiang left behind and don't have an independent soul of your own, I will call you Crooked Soul. I hope you can provide me with a helping hand in the future." Learning to Han Li's words, the giant man stood there stupidly without moving, and aside from looking tame and obedient, there were no hints of reaction. It seemed like he really lacked a consciousness and could only be commanded into action. "I can't believe I am saying these words to body that can't even think for itself, this is so silly." Han Li mockingly he shook his head and lightly strolled inside the stone room. "Crooked Soul, keep up." Once Han Li recovered from his downcast state, his expression returned to normal as if he had never been dejected at all. The truth indeed reflected his guess. He had become abnormally cold-hearted and rational, not able to be easily disturbed by his own emotions. Han Li, who was about to step onto the path of cultivation, was unsure of whether this outstanding change would be a source of great calamity or great fortune. For a short time afterwards, Han Li spent a good half-day in order to deal with the aftermath of the situation. He not only had to bury Dr. Mo's corpse under some big tree but also had to destroy and throw away all the items in the stone room. He even ordered Crooked Soul to beat up the stone room, tearing everything in the room beyond recognition. Only when he was unable to tell the room's original appearance was he willing to stop and rest. After this destruction was over, the day had already transitioned into the evening, and the sun was already setting. Han Li stood in front of what used to be the stone room, now a stone heap, seizing everything up once and making sure nothing was overlooked before he was satisfied. "Crooked Soul, let's go. We still have several matters to take care of tomorrow. It's a pity you don't have a conscience and can't open your mouth to talk, otherwise, I would have someone I can discuss with, which would help make things proceed more smoothly." Under the illumination of the setting sun's fiery red glow, Han Li dragged along a slender and tall shadow. While walking, Han Li constantly talked to the giant man, whom he referred to as Crooked Soul. At last, he found a companion to whom he could confide in without the fear of being complained against. Crooked Soul's expression was cold and detached, making him similar to that of the leader of a neighborhood gang. After arranging a hiding place for Crooked Soul, Han Li returned to his own dwelling. Once inside his house, he acted like a man who hasn't returned back home in a long time, touching and rubbing the chairs and tables, looking everywhere, and talking to himself. Ah, today was an extremely long day. It seems like this day was longer than the first 10 years of my life. Abandoning all of his worries, he came crashing down on his bed, covered his head with his pillow, and began falling asleep. He was very tired. He could not bear the mental and physical exhaustion. But, being able to live is truly wonderful. He couldn't help thinking this, and as he entered into sleep, the corner of his lips lifted up in a slight smile. Hanli lay reclined on the chair that Dr. Mo often sat on, and in his hand, he held a book that read Eternal Spring Arts Incantation on the leather cover. The contents were indeed from one of the volumes of the Eternal Spring Arts Incantation. He read it with keen interest, engrossed by its contents. Dr. Mo often held this book in his hands, reading it countless times without growing sick of it. This abnormal situation used to puzzle Hanli. But today, he found out the reason behind Dr. Mo's strange action, which helped him understand that the doctor had not been looking for some method to maintaining his health, but rather he was trying to hardest to comprehend the Eternal Spring Arts Incantation. Dr. Mo had been unwilling to give up on his own inability to cultivate magic power. Instead of placing his complete faith in Yu Zhitong's promises regarding spiritual roots, Mo Juran had continued to persist in his attempts to understand the Eternal Spring Arts. Hanli discovered the secret volume in a secret compartment along with several other items. The book not only contained the first 6 layers of the chant he had cultivated but also another 2 layers that he has never seen before. This unexpected discovery caused Hanli to feel greatly excited. Once Hanli knew that he was cultivating a legendary technique that could call the wind and summon the rain, his thirst for cultivation grew. After all, who doesn't want to be an immortal deity? When the sun was precisely in the middle of the sky, warm rays shone down through the broad skylight and landed on Hanli, who was reading comfortably, causing him to squint his eyes into thin cracks. Hanli slightly lifted up his head to look at the skylight and felt that it was slightly dazzling. He conveniently used the open book to cover his face and block the shining light of the sun. Once he felt the blackness in front of his eyes, his heart felt more comfortable as he once again silently committed the 7th layer of the chant to memory. He recently discovered that due to his continued use of medicinal assistance, he was about to reach a breakthrough in the Eternal Spring Arts into the 7th layer. The earlier he understood the next few layers, the more beneficial it would be for him when he broke through the bottleneck. More than half-year passed since the day Dr. Mo tried to forcibly seize his body. 2 days after the event, in order to cover up Dr. Mo's death, Hanli personally wrote a letter imitating Dr. Mo's handwriting saying that he wanted to return to his hometown to visit his family. Using Dr. Mo's name, he passed on this letter to one of the sect's senior disciples. Within the letter, he shamelessly used Dr. Mo's tone of voice, claiming that Hanli had succeeded all of Dr. Mo's medicinal expertise and that he could substitute him in seeing and treating patients while Dr. Mo was on his long journey. The fake Dr. Mo was unsure of when he would be back, and so in the letter, he also requested the help of several sect members to temporarily look after his duties until he returned to the 7 Mysteries sect. After handing in the letter, several sect elders clearly did not show any hints of doubt since Dr. Mo often left the mountain for months on end in order to gather herbs. In addition, Dr. Mo had a respected position within the 7 Mysteries sect and was venerated for saving Patriarch Wang's life, so he was free to do as he liked. But several sect elders expressed differing opinions concerning the letter's content about how Hanli has succeeded all of Dr. Mo's medicinal expertise. Half believing it while the other half doubted the validity of the letter. Although most of his patients were sect disciples with small cases of fevers, knife wounds, and the like, Dr. Mo's main responsibility was to treat the division heads, elders, and other high-ranking figures. The majority of the other disciples had to find one of the other few doctors on the mountaintop for treatment. Thus, at first, several senior members did not immediately allow Hanli to take up Dr. Mo's responsibilities. They first made Hanli treat some disciples in order to test his abilities. Hanli was not the least bit bothered by other people's doubts regarding his medicinal abilities, and he carried an indifferent attitude for all those he treated. The only reason he proposed to take up Dr. Mo's job was because he fancied the God Hand Valley and its decent medicinal garden. If he could continue to stay within the mountain valley and let everyone in the mountain valley fall under his control, he would be able to freely use his secret jade bottle in the mountain valley to speed up the growth of rare herbs without fear of other people discovering his secret. Also, even though this small mountain valley was currently inhabited by one person, if Dr. Mo did not come back after a period of time, the division heads or elders might take back the valley on a whim. As a result, in order to demonstrate his medicinal prowess, Hanli expended large amounts of energy to treat the throngs of disciples who came to look for aid and secretly used the rare herbs whose growth he increased every day. Thus, his medicinal knowledge coupled with his magnanimous use of rare and precious herbs caused those who came to receive medical treatment to believe his ability to create miracles after eating medicine that immediately cured their ailments. As he predicted, word of his medical ability that was claimed to be able to bring back the dead spread like a loud thunderclap on a clear day, rapidly causing a sensation throughout the whole Seven Mysteries sect. Everyone on the mountain knew that within their ranks existed a young, talented medicinal god. This medicinal god's abilities were so profound that they were unmeasurable. Under his rescue and medical attention, regardless of whether it was external injuries, internal injuries, or any other miscellaneous or deadly injuries, the most he needed 3 days to return a patient to full health. Compared to Dr. Mo's medicinal abilities, Han Li's prowess seemed to soar with great success. In reality, Han Li's medicinal abilities were more lacking than Dr. Mo's, except Dr. Mo would have never squandered so many precious herbs, so he was far surpassed by Han Li when measuring the length of recovery. Han Li once again helped a seriously injured disciple recover back to full health in a few days. Seeing Han Li's feats, the high-ranking figures could not sit any longer. Barely 1 day passed before they sent someone to invite him over. This time, the person who wanted to meet him was unexpectedly someone he had met before. It was the sect leader Ma, who Han Li had met at Bone Refining Cliff. This sect leader Ma had clearly long forgotten Han Li, a nondescript unofficial disciple. Thus, when he met Han Li, he clearly expressed his wish to allow Han Li to take over Dr. Mo's job. Furthermore, Han Li could enjoy all of Dr. Mo's benefits. Of course, Dr. Mo's venerated position could not be given to him yet because Han Li was still too young. At 17 years old, Han Li could not cause others to worship him. But then again, his official monthly salary depended on his position. In the end, sect leader Ma even expressed how if there are anything Han Li was dissatisfied with, he could bring it up and they would take care of it accordingly. Sect leader Ma's generous attitude made it clear to Han Li that as long as any conditions he brought up were not excessive, the sect would most likely deliver it. With the sect's help, his anticipated objective could be easily reached. But then again, this kind of generous treatment was not often seen in the entire Seven Mysteries sect. It was obvious that the leaders of the sect were fully aware of the importance a highly talented medicinal god had for cultivators in Jiang Hu. As a result, Han Li did not hold back and asked that God Hand Valley would be handed over to be his personal residence. He claimed that he did not want outsiders to disturb him in the valley while he researched and studied the art of healing. This condition was not one that was naturally accepted by sect leader Ma. The sect leader probably wanted to rope in Han Li and unexpectedly took the initiative to offer Han Li a young and pretty maid to serve his daily needs. Han Li, suddenly faced with this unexpected bargaining chip, felt his heartbeat quicken, and just as he was about to tacitly agree, he calmed down and thought of all the secrets he was hiding. Feeling a bit distressed, Han Li rejected the offer. Han Li's action caused the sect leader Ma to show considerable admiration and to view him in a new light. He continued to compliment Han Li, saying that at such a young age, Han Li was quite handsome and that if sect leader Ma had a daughter, he would marry her to Han Li. Han Li didn't know whether to laugh or cry at these words because it wasn't that he rejected feminine charm but that he couldn't afford to at this moment. And just like this, the entire God Hand Valley became Han Li's private territory. Outsiders were not allowed to casually enter. Regarding any visitors, Han Li specifically placed a large clock at the entrance of the valley. It didn't matter who wanted to meet Han Li, they just needed to strike the clock, and Han Li would promptly exit the valley to meet them. This eccentric rule was written in bold characters next to the clock. Even a few of the middle to upper rank members could not avoid this rule. The reason why Han Li laid down this eccentric rule was to completely prevent any last possibility of the secret of his bottle from leaking out. As long as no one broke into the mountain valley, Han Li could guarantee the bottle's heaven-defying properties from being known by a second party. At first, this rule was not an issue for the lower-ranked disciples, but it caused many high-ranking members to be very dissatisfied. They believed Han Li viewed himself too highly, not knowing how high the sky was or how deep the earth was. Not even Dr. Mo was this haughty, so how could Han Li, a trifling disciple who just finished his apprenticeship, dare to act so presumptuously? But after Han Li saved someone who suffered a heavy and life-threatening wound from the brink of death and aided in his recovery, all signs of complaint disappeared without a trace, and no one brought up the eccentric rule again. No one wanted to offend someone who may save their lives countless times like the medicinal god over a small and trivial matter. They naturally believed that forcing visitors to ring a bell to meet him was a strange habit unique to temperamental medicinal gods. The following days passed one by one, and even the sect elders gradually followed Han Li's rule. When they wanted to ask for medical help, they would send someone to respectfully sound the big clock to call for Han Li. God Hand Valley's eccentric rule gradually turned Han Li into a legend of sorts in the Seven Mysteries sects. What was ridiculous was that he was not even ranked in the sect. He didn't have a high-ranking position, nor did he hold any position of power. He was still a low-ranking disciple. But then again, who has seen such a popular disciple in the sect? Even the sect elders who came to visit him would address him as Dr. Han. Not many people dared to directly address Han Li by his name. Of course, this did not apply to Li Feiyu, also known to Han Li as senior disciple Li. Li Feiyu still maintained his cold and detached disposition in front of others, but every time he saw Han Li, he became sloppy and carefree. His treatment of Han Li had not been changed by his new identity as a medicinal god, unlike Fatty Wang and the other disciples who had drifted apart and became more respectful. There were no traces of politeness whenever Li Feiyu addressed Han Li by his name. This made Han Li feel a bit of gratitude. He still wasn't accustomed to living a life of solitude. Just thinking about Li Feiyu's expression whenever he laughed, Han Li couldn't help but think of another individual's face. Recently, he unexpectedly met someone else who had ridden the same carriage as Han Li up the mountain several years ago. Now an inner sect member of the 7 Supreme Division, Wu Yan had contracted a strange illness that was untreatable by all of the doctors who were sent to treat him, tormenting him to no ends. In the end, he had no choice but to use sect leader Ma's name to ask for Han Li's help to cure his illness. Wu Yan's memory was quite good, and when he met the famous Dr. Han, he recognized with a single glance that he was one of the children who came on the same carriage as him, Han Li. His face revealed a shocked look that was still fresh in Han Li's memory to this day. That year, Wu Yan's attitude towards Han Li was not exceptionally good, even a bit vile. Seeing Wu Yan's awkward appearance, Han Li truly felt like laughing. Normally, he would not treat Wu Yan's illness because of their shared history, but in order to not damage his reputation as a medicinal god, he even increased the amount of prescribed medicine so that Wu Yan would recover from his illness in 2 short days. During the period of recovery, however, the large amount of prescribed medicine made Wu Yan suffer even more pain. This was Han Li's way of lightly reprimanding the previously vile-tempered youth. Han Li was not as magnanimous as he appeared to be. He wouldn't forget a single grudge. Just like this, Han Li slowly replaced Dr. Mo's position on the mountain and was even considered to be 1 tier above Dr. Mo. In God Hand Valley, Han Li would take out the small bottle, put it inside an empty space within the valley, and allowed the mysterious green liquid to form every 7 to 8 days. With the mysterious green liquid, he would hasten the growth of rare and ancient herbs, which he would refine into medicine with the utmost care. Only a small portion of these herbs were used on those who visited him to seek medical aid. The majority of the herbs were taken and used for Han Li's personal use. He would use them to cultivate and refine Yuan Qi and to push forward in his cultivation of the eternal spring arts. Han Li gently shifted the body within the late Dr. Mo's chair to find a more comfortable position. Although the chair he sat on was indeed Dr. Mo's armchair, this place was not Dr. Mo's house but rather Han Li's residence. He had taken all the items he thought would be useful from Dr. Mo's house and, with no trace of politeness, claimed them as his own, moving them into his own residence. As for the position in which Han Li was sitting, even if someone saw his disrespectful actions, they would not do anything because in their eyes, the current Han Li's worth far exceeded that of Dr. Mo's. People were surprisingly very realistic and practical. Dr. Mo's residence was far bigger than Han Li's, so moving into the bigger house would have been more suitable. Unfortunately, Han Li thought that living there was a bit weird. After all, he was the main cause of Dr. Mo's death. Brazenly living in the house of someone he killed with his own hand would cause his heart to become heavy and cold. As a result, living in his own residence was far more reassuring and comfortable to Han Li. However, whenever he thought of Dr. Mo, Han Li would naturally be unable to forget the sad fact that he was still under the control of a dead person. In the period of time after Dr. Mo's death, he carefully examined his own body, both internally and externally, countless times. He was still unable to refine that thread of cold yin qi hidden within his dantian. Han Li tried to use the pure spirit powder and other famous poison dispelling methods, but sadly none of them were effective. It seemed like the long journey he would have to take in 1 year's time was unavoidable. Han Li, who had been sitting still for half a day, suddenly raised his left hand and straightened one of his fingers, making him appear unfathomably mysterious. But not long after, the space half an inch away from his erect fingertip suddenly fluctuated, and several small sparks of fire appeared. When the sparks first appeared, they immediately made a zi-la sound as they twisted and turned in the air to form a walnut-sized ball of red flames. Although this fireball was not big, a blistering heat emanated from this small ball of fire, permeating the entire room. As Han Li reclined, his face was still covered by his book. He appeared to be asleep, if not for the fact that the small fireball at the tip of his finger continued to release zi-la zilla sounds of high-temperature combustions. This, coupled with his unmoving fingertip, made Han Li appear particularly eye-catching. As minutes inched by, the fireball continued to maintain the same vigorous energy, not revealing any hint of being extinguished. However, Han Li eventually shifted. The finger he used to support the fireball started to tremble slightly. The trembling from his finger grew to affect his wrist, then his entire arm. Soon, even his whole body started to tremble. Abruptly, Han Li sat up on the armchair, not even aware that the book had fallen away from his face and onto the ground. His two eyes stared unwaveringly at the fireball on his fingertips, his face red from holding his breath. From his forehead to his neck, his exposed skin revealed many small beads of sweat, appearing as if he had just finished performing some intense exercise that made his body overheat. After a short while, the fireball started to sway alongside Han Li's intense rocking. The floating flame would be large in one moment, then small in the next, unable to maintain a constant state. Not long after, it became small once again. The flame shrank into a spark and dissipated into thin air. Once the fireball disappeared, Han Li felt like a man who had his backbone removed. His fireball had greatly consumed his energy. Extremely drained, he reclined his body once more on the chair. This fireball technique is vexing to train in. Even though I've researched this technique for half a year, I'm still unable to have complete control over it. The most I can manage is extend its duration by a little bit. Talking to himself, Han Li stared at the ceiling. It turned out that the last few pages of the Eternal Spring Arts book contained several magic techniques. At first glance, it was evident that these were beginner-level techniques for cultivators who just entered the sect. Since all he knew was the Eternal Spring Arts incantation, this made Hanli feel like he obtained a treasure, and for several consecutive nights, he was unable to sleep due to his excitement. Since he had witnessed firsthand Dr. Mo using a few of the magic techniques, it was no surprise that he would be this excited. Hanli had found Dr. Mo's strength terrifying, so he viewed the formidable collection of techniques with great interest. Unfortunately for Hanli, who was currently at the peak of the 6th layer of the Eternal Spring Arts incantation, he was like a beggar holding a golden bowl and asking for alms. Since he was never taught any basic magic technique, he was unable to perform even the simplest spell. But now he suddenly came upon several technique incantations. How could he not be pleased? The final pages of the book had 5 techniques and their respective incantations. They were Fireball, Soul Lock Talisman, Imperial Flight, Telekinesis, and Heaven's Eye. To Hanli, all of the techniques and their incantations were still very ancient, profound, and hard to comprehend. This was no surprise since the incantations were composed of words and phrases from an ancient language. Even though he had read quite a few books, he had a very superficial understanding of the ancient texts, so he was unable to immediately grasp certain meanings. Helpless and without a choice, Hanli finally began studying the Eternal Spring Arts as if his life depending on it, driving straight into piles of different books that were related to old, classical languages. He bitterly studied the incantations' meanings every day and night, racking his brain several tens of times over every phrase and every word. Refusing to quit, Hanli was resolved to completely comprehend all of the techniques listed in the book. Even though he had never gone to a school or academy to obtain a formal education, he understood that making a mistake while cultivating boundlessly powerful energy would be more difficult to deal with than an infuriating obsession and might very well take this small life of his. Thinking of his own personal well-being, Hanli was filled with trepidation and fear, not daring to be even a slight bit careless. After 3 months of intensive research, Hanli finally was able to gain a level of mastery over the theory behind the incantations and apply them. As a result, he was finally starting to truly practice these techniques. However, Hanli's insane method of studying delivered a large mental blow to his enthusiasm and stamina. He had originally planned to rely upon his intelligence, which was enhanced by the Eternal Spring Arts, and thought that learning magic techniques shouldn't be difficult, but who knew that he would suddenly oddly become baffled. He obviously knew the theory behind the techniques, but when it came time to applying them into practice, he could never manage to succeed. No matter what he did, he could not do it right. He did not know whether it was because the spells were wrong, he read the incantations incorrectly, or his magic power was not in the right place. Unable to discover the reason why, Hanli felt extremely slow-witted. Hanli did not know what was causing his failures, but if it was a deficiency in magic power, he would eat another 2 spiritual herbs and the problem would be solved. However, this was a problem that he was unable to wrap his head around. Hanli came to the conclusion that his innate talent for performing celestial arts was not as great as he thought it was. It was only after a long period of bitter training that he finally gained a bit of success in the Fireball technique and the Heaven's Eyes technique. As for the other 3 magic techniques, he did not succeed, he was unable to even reach their initial layers. With great dismay, he could only concentrate on the Fireball technique and Heaven's Eye technique. He placed quite a bit of hope into these 2 celestial arts since they were the only ones he could comprehend. Among these, the Fireball technique's power did not disappoint Hanli, in fact, it greatly surpassed Hanli's expectations. Despite of the Fireball technique's small size, it contained a terrifyingly high temperature that could not be underestimated. There was nothing that the Fireball technique couldn't burn. Even if the Fireball touched a blade made of tempered steel, the area the Fireball touched would immediately be melted into liquid steel upon contact. Faced with this inhumanly frightening power, Hanli even threw the Fireball into a puddle of water to test it. Upon contact, the reaction of the puddle of water was similar to that of oil, and immediately lit up instead of extinguishing the fireball. After thoroughly understanding the fireball technique's immense power, Han Li finally realized why Yu's Hitong looked down upon mortals with a lofty attitude. Now that Han Li thought about it, a mediocre cultivator who knew a celestial art similar to the fireball technique could easily kill experts in Jiang Hu. If it was a slightly stronger cultivator, then he could easily sweep across Jiang Hu, unrivaled under the heavens. The difference in power was simply too immense. It was no wonder that Yu's Hitong looked at normal mortals as if they were insects he could crush underfoot. As for the other techniques, Han Li held high expectations for the Heaven's Eye technique after witnessing the terrifying power that the seemingly simple fireball technique contained. After executing it, however, Han Li understood that this magic technique was simply a small transfer of energy into one's eyes. There was hardly any difficulty worth mentioning, making it appear as if it were easy to master. However, the Heaven's Eye technique seemed easy to master because its difficulty was directly proportional to the strength of its target. It grew increasingly more difficult to master it as the target's strength increased. Its functions focused primarily on checking the strength and purity of the magic power belonging to cultivators, making it a useful support-type magic technique. At first, Han Li was exhilarated and used the Heaven's Eye technique on both of his eyes. He then used his eyes, now filled with magic power, to inspect his own body's condition. Through his enhanced perception, he saw a dim layer of white light permeating his body. The closer he got to his dantian, the more dense the white light became. The white light was his magic power. When Han Li saw this, he couldn't help but extend a hand to touch the white light. However, he felt nothing at all. He noticed that magic power was similar to air, both were incorporeal and without form, and only through the use of the Heaven's Eye technique could he hope to inspect it. But after several consecutive inspections, Han Li completely lost all interest in the Heaven's Eye technique. His loss of interest was due to the fact that he was all alone in the entire Seven Mysteries sect. Who could he use the Heaven's Eye technique on? He couldn't possibly spend the whole day narcissistically examining himself. Therefore, aside from intensifying his training of the fireball technique, which he hoped to be able to familiarize himself with in order to use it during actual combat, Han Li turned his attention to other types of magic technique that he had yet to learn. He began practicing other magic techniques slowly and in a repetitive manner, hoping for more breakthroughs. Slightly regaining a portion of his body's energy, Han Li could only sigh after thinking about the difficulty of training in other magic techniques. The frequency of his complaints, however, decreased significantly over time as he continued practicing the techniques. Dong dong. The clock near the valley entrance was sounded, its chime spreading into the valley. Han Li wrinkled his eyebrows. He didn't know why, but recently, the amount of people who came for help had suddenly increased. Furthermore, a majority of them had broken hands, broken arms, knife wounds, projectile wounds, and other similar external injuries. He did not dare to neglect his patients because aiding a person is like aiding in putting out a fire star. He collected himself and grabbed his medical bag. After exiting his house, Han Li made a beeline for the valley entrance. Outside the valley forest entrance early in the morning, Han Li saw a high-ranking disciple wearing embroidered clothing. The disciple anxiously paced to and fro near the big clock like an ant on a hot pan. Upon seeing Han Li, he immediately hurried towards him. "Dr. Han, please follow me. My master has been poisoned and is on the verge of death. I respectfully ask if you would take a look to see if you can remove the poison from his body." As this person approached, Han Li realized that the disciple had a familiar face. Having seen him a few times, he realized that the man was Elder Li's most favored disciple, Marong, who had previously come to visit Han Li several times on behalf of his master, Elder Li. Therefore, Marong could almost be considered an acquaintance. "Poisoned?" Han Li asked while immediately walking down the road. As they hurried along, Han Li asking darkly about the details behind Elder Li's misfortune. Han Li was aware that there were some poison that even he himself had no experience with. Yes, my master got into a fight with a member of the feral wolf gang while traveling down the mountains to take care of some business. In the end, he was not careful and suffered an attack from a dark green seed-looking item. At first, my master was not overly worried and even retaliated by killing his opponent. Who knew that the poison would suddenly take effect on the way back up the mountain, causing him to fall unconscious? Have you tried to seek the aid of other doctors? Of course we did. If it was any ordinary poison, then I would not have come to trouble Dr. Han. Those quack doctors, other than knowing that my master suffered from a rare poison, knew nothing else. They did not even dare to prescribe a medicine. Marong spoke with an extremely dissatisfied face. As Han Li listened, his facial expression did not change. As he hurriedly followed Marong down the path, the only noise he made was "N." Soon, however, doubt arose in his heart. Truthfully, he was not extremely well versed in curing poisons. If it was an internal or external injury, he could depend on several types of medicinal herbs. If he had to treat some rare deadly poison, however, he was not sure that he would be able to provide a solution to the problem. Even though he had the pure spirit powder, an antidote that could cure hundreds of poisons, the world contained an innumerable amount of poisons. Who knew whether the pure spirit power could cure the specific poison that was harming elderly? The few local doctors were not completely useless in the healing and dispelling poisons, otherwise, they would have been kicked off the mountain by the elders of the Seven Mysteries sect. After all, the sect could not afford to raise a group of incompetent medical disciples who were unable to heal even the smallest of injuries. However, they did not dare to even prescribe a simple prescription, showing that this poison was a troublesome problem that they have never encountered before. Han Li could only survive by having many hidden cards and being able to adapt himself to any situation. Even if he was unable to save elderly, it wasn't likely that it would lower his own reputation. After all, there was no medicinal god that could cure every sickness. As Han Li was carefully refining his plan, Marong practically forced Han Li to run lightly while grasping the sleeves of his garment. In this manner, the two hurried towards Elder Li's residence. Seeing him so energetic, Han Li knew that their master-to-disciple relationship was pretty deep. Han Li felt slightly sorrowful because he thought back to his relationship with Dr. Mo. Although they were master and disciples in name, their actual relationship was similar to two enemies. If only their relationship had been as harmonious as the one between Marong and his master. In the depths of his heart, Han Li had always held a form of respect towards Dr. Mo. After all, his medicinal knowledge and eternal spring arts had been imparted to him by the deceased doctor. But sadly, things were not meant to be. The heavens dictated that the two would be unable to live in the same world, forcing them fight an intensive battle in which Dr. Mo died accidentally by Han Li's own hands. Thinking about his past memories, Han Li couldn't help but sigh. Afterwards, Marong brought him to Elder Li's place. Elder Li's residence was not extravagant, instead, it was merely a small, humble house. Surrounding several houses in close proximity was a 2-meter high, half-a-meter thick dirt wall encircling a simple courtyard. Facing the path was an arched, half-moon gateway through which Han Li could see that the courtyard was filled with many visitors. Stepping into the courtyard, Han Li realized that the actual number of people was much higher than what he saw from outside the gate. They gathered in groups of 2s or 3s, discussing Elder Li's state in low voices. Han Li had already heard that Elder Li was a good-natured person in the Seven Mysteries sect. Regardless if one was a lower-ranked disciple or an esteemed colleague, he rarely got angry with anyone, nor did he scramble for power and profit in the sect. As a result, many figures in the sect, both the important and the insignificant, had nothing but compliments for the old man, causing his popularity to be very high. Not that Elder Li was suffering from an poison-induced illness. Everyone with high status in the sect would eventually pay their respects either personally or through a representative. Not a single person failed to do so, regardless if their reason for coming was heartfelt or hypocritic. As a result, the courtyard soon became filled by a throng of people. Once Han Li came in, he was recognized by the people in the courtyard. The lowest protectors immediately surrounded him, each striving to be the first to greet him. "How are you, medicinal god Han?" Dr. Han came. A wave of well-wishing rang out and continuously battered his ears. Even if he didn't want to hear the endless noise, he had no choice but to endure. Seeing these faces brimming with enthusiasm, Han Li similarly showed a bright smile that did not lose to the crowd in terms of splendor. However, although he appeared to be extremely courteous, he was actually sick of false pleasantries. Fortunately, those with high status, such as the vice-sect leaders and consecrated elders, implicitly nodded their heads in Han Li's direction, showing their acknowledgement of his arrival without making a move to approach him. Seeing that they did not make it uncomfortable for Han Li by making him greet them, Han Li had a good impression about these esteemed individuals. Because of Ma Rong's low status, he was unable to anything besides stand to the side with a look of concern. As the protectors tried to get closer to Han Li with their constant stream of pleasantries, Ma Rong's face revealed worry while both of his bands rubbed against each other non-stop. Finally, after Han Li finished greeting the last person, Ma Rong couldn't wait any longer and immediately rushed forward, grabbing Han Li's arm with one hand and charging straight into the house. This rude and impetuous action angered a few people who wished to get on good terms with medicinal god Han, revealing a bit of their displeasure. On the outside, Han Li had a forced smile, but he was actually quite pleased with Ma Rong's decision. This way, he could finally get rid of those incessantly annoying people without having to offend anyone. With a sense of urgency, Han Li was pulled into living room by Ma Rong. There were not very many people inside, except a few family members and two elders. Sect leader Ma was also there, but what surprised Han Li the most was that Li Feiyu was also inside the room. Han Li was shocked. According to what he knew, there was no relationship between Li Feiyu and Elder Li, so why did he showed here? Just as his stomach was about to burst with questions, Han Li noticed that senior disciple Li was comforting a petite girl with tears flowing down her face. Li Feiyu's highly focused expression was laced with traces of emotion, a look that was very different from the one he usually showed to his fellow disciples. Looking at Li Feiyu's enamored appearance, Han Li suddenly realized what was going on. Startled, he couldn't help but think that it was extremely funny. Han Li promptly and carefully scrutinized the young lady's appearance, wanting to see just what kind of beauty could make Li Feiyu disregard everything for the sake of love. The young lady looked to be around 15 to 16 years of age and was wearing a jasper hairpin. In addition, she wore a lotus green dress, giving the originally sweet and pleasant facial features a naughty and mischievous air. Despite of this, her two eyes were swollen red, making her seem lovely yet pathetic. Her dejected appearance gave people an urge to lovingly bring her into a hugging embrace. Z's. She really is one fair young lady. Han Li exclaimed for several moments in his heart, thinking that Li Feiyu falling under this lady's love snare was pardonable. In his heart, there was still a trace of envy and jealousy, not knowing when he himself would also be able to have an intimate companion. Maybe it was because he realized that Han Li was studying this young lady, but Ma Rong was quick to introduce everyone within the house to Han Li in order for him to establish a sense of familiarity. Sect leader Ma and a white-faced elder Qidian whom Han Li had saw before naturally did not need any introductions, and he immediately took the initiative to step forward to check the body. Greetings sect leader Ma, elder Qidian. He. The young Dr. Han has arrived. Sect leader Ma acted as if he were Han Li's close friend, almost as if there was no difference between their status. Dr. Han is Dr. Han, why do you have to mention the word young? Han Li silently cursed within his heart in disagreement with sect leader Ma's phrase. On the other hand, Elder Qian's attitude was cold and detached. He merely nodded his head, acting in complete opposite to sect leader Ma. Han Li was not offended by Elder Qian's indifference, since he knew that Elder Qidian practiced a special cultivation method that required him to sever his feelings and desires, causing him to treat everyone with the same cold and indifferent attitude. In addition to sect leader Ma and Elder Qidian, there was another tall, sturdy, and red-faced elder with whom Hanli wasn't familiar with. This elder's palms were rough and coarse, and all 10 of his short fingers were thick and solid. From this, it was evident from a single glance that this elder trained in a special martial art. This is Elder Zhao, my master's close friend. His previously job was to supervise the treasure gathering division outside the mountain. He just came back 2 days ago. Marong said while introducing the elder to Hanli. Towards Hanli, Elder Zhao was neither cold nor warm. He made an N sound with his nose, not saying a word, but the doubt in his eyes was evident. He clearly didn't trust the invited medicinal god Han's skills due to his young age. Since Elder Zhao didn't seem to have a favorable attitude towards him, Hanli would naturally not take the initiative to fawn over Elder Zhao. Following Elder Zhao's example, Hanli used a flat tone to give his respects, then tried his best to avoid the other person. Tomorrow I will bring myself together and amend all the unreasonable areas the readers have brought to my attention, so I can only release 1 chapter today. I hope that the readers will forgive me. I will strive to make this book even more amazing than it currently is. Thank you all for your patience. It was obvious that sect leader Ma sensed the pair's animosity. Not only was he not worried, his face revealed a hint of a cheerful look. Even though young Dr. Han is of a young age, his medicinal skills can be said to have reached perfection. I believe that under Dr. Han's care, elderly can rise from the brink of death, he suddenly said, praising Han Li's medicinal abilities. Really? With him being so young, is his medicinal expertise that exceptional? Well, I don't really believe you. Don't tell me that his medicinal knowledge is even better than Dr. Mo's medicinal knowledge. After hearing these words, a few family members became at a loss, unsure of what to do. They didn't want to place Elderly's fate in Han Li's hands, nor did they even hope that this little medicinal god could cure the poison and save his life. To open their mouths to refute Elder Zhao's words also did not seem appropriate. The party in question was Elderly's friend and also an elder in the Seven Mysteries sect. He. Elder Zhao is not aware that little Dr. Han is Dr. Mo's proud disciple, and his medicinal expertise already far surpasses that of Dr. Mo. Vice sect leader secretly smirked, adding firewood to the fire. Even if this little boy of about years of age started learning when he was still in his mother's womb, how exceptional can his medicinal expertise be? I still won't believe you unless I personally see it with my own eyes, said Elder Zhao, shaking his head like a palm leaf fan. He was still unwilling to directly criticize Han Li and thus fall under vice sect leader's trap by offending someone whom he shouldn't have offended. Elder Zhao might have seemed like a rude and impetuous individual, but regardless of his attitude, he was not a fool who would rashly insult another member of the sect without confirming the identity of the person he was judging. After all, he had been able to hold the high status of an elder and maintain this position. On the other side, Han Li rolled his eyes, thinking to himself, why do I need to prove to you whether my medicinal skills are good enough? He knew that sect leader Ma intentionally drew out this response, but Han Li still felt a bit depressed. It was very apparent that this elder Zhao and sect leader Ma were not of the same faction and even had a bit of a hostile relationship. The mixed circular palm that Elder Zhao practices in has been trained to perfection. Its might is boundless. Sect leader Ma said. Seeing Han Li look displeased with Elder Zhao, sect leader Ma felt the joy within his heart become even stronger, making him uncontrollably cry out random and strange phrases. Hung. How can it compare to sect leader Ma's highly polished mysterious yin finger? It seemed that Elder Zhao did not care for the other's identity as a vice sect master. Deadpanned and with no traces of politeness, vice sect master Ma retaliated with a phrase of his own. Ha ha. Elder Zhao has wrongly praised me. It was evident that sect leader Ma a type of person who hid knives within their smiles. He did not really mind Elder Zhao's sarcastic tone, smiling as he calmly received the other's false compliment. This was not the first time Elder Zhao had faced this type of situation, nor could he do anything about it. He could only shut his mouth, unwilling to nag with his thick-skinned opponent. He inwardly felt that there was something he couldn't wrap his mind around concerning the other's words. Even though sect leader Ma was not in the same faction as Elder Zhao, this was the first time they had revealed the conflicts of the upper echelons in front of so many juniors. It was unknown whether there were any tricks involved. As he listened to the two opposing parties exchanging harsh words, Han Li's expression did not change in the least as he pretended to be ignorant and unknowing of everything. But within his heart, he knew that sect leader Ma was once again trying to instigate a rift in the relationship between Han Li and Elder Zhao. Sect leader Ma had been indirectly attacking his opponents with words ever since he met Han Li, trying to rope this highly skilled medicinal god into his faction, thus expanding his influence. However, Han Li had never even considered joining the Seven Mysteries sect's internal struggle for power. It was not because he was intentionally aloof from political and material pursuits or that he was arrogant, but because ever since he came into contact with Dr. Mo, Yu's Hitong and similar people of high status, his aspirations were a lot higher, especially since he learned two different types of spells. He already viewed the Seven Mysteries sect's internal struggle with minimal importance. Although Han Li's strength was not weak, he did not want to offend those of a higher status. It was for this reason that he chose to avoid giving a clear reply, neither accepting nor accepting the invitations from the upper echelon. Just like that, it was sect leader Ma's turn to have endless headaches. Even though Han Li's profound medicinal skills made it so that he could act stubbornly, Han Li was dragging out his response for too long of a period, making sect leader Ma extremely frustrated. To this day, Han Li had still refused to join his faction, nor had he given a direct answer. But in order to prevent Han Li from entering other factions, sect leader Ma had to do his best to ruin the relationship between Han Li and the other upper echelon members, inciting disharmony. Whether these childish tactics were effective or not, Han Li did not know, but up until today it was the first time that an upper-level faction had annoyed him greatly. Right now, sect leader Ma was doing his best to undermine Han Li's opinion of Elder Zhao, presumably wanting him to have no good memories of this elder. Ma Rong, noticing the start of a C** fight, felt a bit of panic within his heart and hurriedly continued his introductions. "This is my master's wife, Li Shi." He began by pointing at a middle-aged woman who had some resemblance to the young lady. This is. The young lady by Li Fiu's side was introduced last. Her name was Jiang Hu. Unexpectedly, she was Elder Li's niece. When he introduced Li Fiu, the other intentionally pretended to not recognize Han Li, revealing a cool, unapproachable appearance. This made Ma Rong, who had initiated the introductions himself, feel awkward. He hurriedly whispered an explanation to Han Li, saying, "Protector Li has always been like this. This is his normal temperament and is not specifically directed at you, Dr. Han, so please do not take this personally." Han Li smiled slightly, knowing that Li Fiu did not want to reveal their relationship in front of so many people. "His demeanor means nothing to me. I would not lower myself by begging for attention from other people. Right now, it is better to look at Elder Li's condition than to waste time by arguing. Saving lives is more important." Han Li intentionally made a dismissive comment toward Li Fiu. Ma Rong, upon hearing this, put his heart at ease and invited everybody into the bedroom of the sick patient. After hearing Han Li's statement, Li Fiu's lips twitched a bit, appearing nonchalant. When everyone turned their bodies, he suddenly made a funny face towards Han Li's direction, then quickly returned to his normal appearance, making it seem as if nothing had happened. Han Li strongly resisted his urge to smile. Soon after, he closely followed senior disciple Li's footsteps, coming up to the front of Elder Li's bed. Upon seeing the facial features of the person on the bed, the normally bold Han Li couldn't help but suck in a cold breath. Now he finally understood why the other doctors were not willing to prescribe medicine. Right now, the originally benign-faced senior elderly remained unconscious, but there were spots of poison, the size of copper coins, extending from his face to his neck region and from his hands to his legs. Each spot of poison appeared to be different from the others because they varied in a plethora of abnormally bright colors. Everyone who saw them became visibly apprehensive. What was even more problematic for Hanli was that Elderly's lips were greenish-black and his facial features were enshrouded in a layer of dark air. This meant that the poison was in its late stages, thus making the complex task of saving Elderly's small life more difficult.